Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we are doing the top 10 most overrated horror films of all time. Now, this was created by ANDREWBALLINA about a week or so ago, and I was asked by BRONCOJUGGALOTALKSMOVIES to give my take on this, so here we go with the top 10 most overrated horror films of all time. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that these are my personal opinions. I am not a professional movie critic. I'm not an expert. I'm just a huge, massive horror fan. I've been watching horror films my whole life, and, you know, these are just my personal opinions. You might be shocked by some of these picks I gave. You might be like, oh, he's finally lost it. That's it. He's lost his mind. I hope you don't feel that way, because a lot of the films on this list I actually really like. I just feel like they're talked a little bit too much, like they're put up on a pedestal. They're looked at as being some of the greatest horror films of all time, and I feel like they don't really necessarily always deserve that honor, that prestige. But at any rate, let's get started, shall we? In at number 10 is Hatchet, directed by Adam Green. And I never really understood the appeal of this film. I remember when I saw the ad in, I think it was Fangoria magazine, with the DVD covers and old school American horror. I was like, ooh, what is this? And it starred a lot of the classic legends of the slasher films, like Robert Englund and Kane Hodder and Tony Todd and stuff. And I was like, wow, this really sounds good. So I was really excited. I actually went and bought it at the record store the first day it came out. And when I got home and watched it, I was just like, okay, I don't really get it, you know. I get what they were trying to go for, like that throwback to the old school 80s slasher films. But the acting was so bad. It was just like, I mean, I can handle a little bit of cheesy, corny acting. Sometimes it adds to the charm of, you know, an old school 80s horror film. But this was just too much. I couldn't handle it. The acting was so bad. It definitely had some great gore, and the character of Victor Crowley, as played by Kane Hodder in the film, you know, was pretty interesting. But I didn't see where they could make a whole franchise out of it. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the Hatchet series, so I have to admit. That being said, number 9 is going to be Wes Craven's New Nightmare. That's right, Wes Craven making his long-awaited return to the franchise after several years. So the franchise at that point had become like a parody of itself, with Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. And Freddy was no longer that scary boogeyman that we saw in the original movie. He had become a parody of himself. And I didn't like that, you know. So I got really excited at the thought of Wes Craven coming back and hopefully making a much darker film and bringing the series back to its roots. And in some ways it did achieve that. It did make Freddy much scarier, which was great. And it did have a darker tone. It was much more serious. And the problem with me is the film really dragged. The pacing was very, very slow moving. I find myself falling asleep every single time I try and watch it, and that's a problem, you know. I feel like the movie within a movie idea was really cool, and I feel like he utilized that to much better effect in the Scream franchise than he actually did here. So it was a great concept, but I feel like it could have been executed a lot better. I did enjoy, however, Heather Langenkamp coming back, and Wes Craven being in the film, and Robert Englund playing himself, all those characters playing themselves, and that was kind of interesting. But like I said, I just feel like it could have been handled better, and the pacing was very slow. So, in at number 8 is going to be Drag Me to Hell. A lot of people love this movie, and it was the return for Sam Raimi to the horror genre, the celebrated director of the Evil Dead franchise. Love those movies. And I love what he did with the Spider-Man movies as well. Except for 3. We won't talk about Spider-Man 3. But at any rate, I really was excited about it when I first heard about it. I was like, ooh, Sam Raimi's coming back to horror. That's cool. But I just didn't care for the film, you know. I saw that they were trying to inject some of that Evil Dead style into the film. But I just feel like it didn't work, you know. I didn't care for the film. I don't feel like it's a classic like a lot of people make it out to be, but that's just me, you know. I just didn't care for it much. Number 7 is going to be From Dusk Till Dawn. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be pissed about that one, but I really did not enjoy that film. I liked how it started off as kind of a crime drama, in the vein of like a Quentin Tarantino style, and Quentin Tarantino is actually in the film, and so that made it really cool. And then you had George Clooney. I liked his performance in the film. So yeah, I like how it started off, but it's very jarring to me how in the middle it just switches from being a crime drama into a horror movie, into a vampire movie. It's like the switch is such a huge right turn that it's like, I don't get it, you know. I didn't like it. It was too much for me to handle. And I feel like the horror aspects of it, the vampire part of the movie, was a little bit cheesy. I didn't like how it was done. It kind of felt to me like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode, you know. It's a little bit cheesy. Maybe a little bloodier than Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but at any rate, I didn't care much for it. And I still don't, and was never a big fan of the franchise or this film. I know Robert Rodriguez is a very good director, but I just felt they missed the mark on this one. Next up is going to be Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D. I always thought the 3D aspect of it was pretty hokey, you know, and the 3D effects were pretty hokey. It was so obvious that they were trying to make stuff stick out at you and come out at you, and it was like, it just didn't work, you know. And I feel like this was a steep drop in quality from the first 2 films, because I think the first 2 films are just classic horror films. They're just awesome, they're scary, so well done, and I feel like they hold up really well, especially Friday the 13th Part 2. It really holds up so well today. But Friday the 13th Part 3 doesn't hold up very well, you know. When you look back at it, it looks a lot campier. It seems like it was a lot less serious than the first 2. They would definitely go in a more campy direction, pun intended. I know it's Camp Crystal Lake, but you know what I mean. And the whole 3D thing I felt was very hokey and kind of silly. But I will say that Richard Brooker was an awesome Jason, and they did take Jason very seriously, and they handled the Jason character very well. And there are some nasty kills in the film that I enjoyed. The gore effects are very good. And but I don't like the characters very much. I don't like Dana Kimmel, who is the star of the film, you know. And I didn't care much for her performance. She wasn't very memorable. The only character really that stands out to me is Shelley. I thought he was really funny. He was really good. But yeah, the movie doesn't hold up as well. I feel like it was a steep drop in quality of the first 2. Luckily, they came back with Part 4 and kind of brought it back to par, you know. Okay, so the next one in at number 5 is going to be Zombieland. Now, a lot of people love this film, and I do enjoy the performances of Woody Harrelson and Emma Stone and Abigail Breslin. I like the whole Bill Murray cameo thing, was really cool. But other than that, I felt like it was a pretty decent zombie horror comedy, but I felt it was done a couple of years ago, before that, better, with Shaun of the Dead. I felt like Shaun of the Dead was a much better take on what they were trying to go for in Zombieland. Shaun of the Dead is just a classic, and to me that's the perfect horror comedy with zombies. Just an awesome movie. At any rate, In at number 4, now this is definitely going to be a controversial one, and that is Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Now, don't get me wrong, I do really enjoy this movie. I actually love it. But people always seem to put it on a pedestal. People always say that this is the best sequel in the Halloween series. So many people say that. But to me, it's nowhere near the quality of the first 2 films. I feel like the performances are the only thing that make it good. And that is the performances of Danielle Harris, Donald Pleasance, and Ellie Cornell. Without that, I feel like it would be kind of a paint-by-numbers, generic slasher film that doesn't have very much style. It's not very scary. I know people love that opening sequence, and that was shot very well, but I don't feel like it gives a sense of dread to the film like a lot of people say. I just feel like it was very stylishly shot, those opening scenes. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of style in Halloween 4. And I really did not enjoy George Wilbur's take on the character of Michael Myers. I didn't like the mask. I hated the mask. And I felt like Michael Myers was not as scary because, and a lot of that has to do with George Wilbur's performance. He felt kind of one-dimensional and kind of a generic version of the Michael we saw in the first 2 films, which was terrifying. I didn't get that sense of fear in this film. But I will say the performances of Danielle Harris, Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, who's just always great, and Ellie Cornell are what elevate this film and make it good, and that's the only thing that makes this movie good to me. And there you have it. I know that's a controversial one because I'm such a hardcore fan of Halloween, and I do enjoy the film, but I just feel like it's nowhere in the league of the first 2 films. And to me, Halloween 2 is by far the best sequel, but that's just my opinion, you know. I feel like Halloween 2 was the only one that stood up against the original classic, which the original Halloween is an absolute masterpiece. It's a 5-star classic in every way. It's one of the greatest horror films ever made. But yeah, Halloween 4 I felt like was a good, solid return to form, but not a great movie, like a lot of people make it out to be. And next up is going to be another controversial one. So guys, don't kill me, you know, this is just my opinion. It's going to be Child's Play from 1988. Now, I know Child's Play is held in such high regard, and I do really enjoy Child's Play. In fact, I love it. Now, the whole point of this to me is films that are overrated. I feel like this film is talked about a lot with some of the masterpieces of horror, like Halloween, like Psycho, and, you know, some of the Alfred Hitchcock classics. You know, Rosemary's Baby, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Omen, the list goes on and on of classic masterpieces of horror. And a lot of time I find people saying Child's Play, putting that in the mix. And I do not feel like Child's Play really deserves to be mentioned with those films. It's not a masterpiece. It's a great classic slasher film, and I love the character of Chucky. And I love the way Brad Dourif plays the Chucky character and voices the Chucky character, plays Charles Lee Ray. Definitely, I really enjoy the film. It's so much fun. To me, it's like a great popcorn action horror movie. There's so much fun to be had with it. And yes, you have the great character of Chucky, who is very memorable. And you got some memorable kills, some nice gore effects. You got some great funny one-liners. It's just a really fun ride. But is it a masterpiece? No. There is some cheese in Child's Play. It's not a perfect film. And it's not really that scary. There are a couple pretty scary scenes, but overall, it's more of just a fun thrill ride, and just a fun action horror movie. I do enjoy it. I do think it is a classic slasher film, but I don't think it's in the upper echelon of horror classics like the films I mentioned. So yeah, there you have it. In at number 3 is Child's Play. Number 2 is going to be Dawn of the Dead from 2004, the remake, not the original classic from George Romero. This is the remake by Zack Snyder, which is a very good remake. It's probably one of the better remakes that I've seen in a long time. But I don't feel it holds a candle to the original George Romero classic. That's just an absolute masterpiece. In my opinion, that is the greatest zombie film ever made. Dawn of the Dead. I thought it was even better than the original Night of the Living Dead, which is another absolute masterpiece. So I feel like Dawn of the Dead is just a really solid remake, a really nice modern update on the classic. And I like how they made the zombies run. They made it a very scary, cool, modern take on the classic zombie film. And I enjoyed it. But I just don't feel... A lot of people feel like it's the much better version of Dawn of the Dead than the original movie. And that's just kind of crazy to me. Because to me, nothing holds a candle to the original classic Dawn of the Dead. But that's just my opinion. Now, in at number 1 is going to be a film that I really don't care that much for, and that is the Amityville Horror, the original Amityville Horror from 1979, starring Margot Kidder and James Brolin. Yeah, the thing with this movie is, you know, when you have a haunted house type movie like that, I feel like you need to see some kind of indications of what's going on. But not a lot is happening in this film, and it doesn't quite hold up. I mean, back when I was a kid, I thought it was scary, but when you look back at it today, it just doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold water, you know. I feel like you needed to see some of those things that were going on in the house. I actually felt like the second film, Amityville 2, The Possession, was the better movie. Because that was based more on the actual facts of what happened in that house, and that was the murders that took place when the young boy took the shotgun and shot his entire family and murdered them while they slept, you know. And that was really messed up, and how he claimed that the voices in the house spoke to him and made him do it. I found that interesting, and they handled that pretty well in Amityville 2, The Possession. It was very scary. Of course, that was the first half before it became like an Exorcist clone type movie. Then it kind of went off the rails. But yeah, the original Amityville Horror, the only thing I really enjoy about it is the score. I love that score, that la 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 da 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 da. That score is brilliant, and that's like kind of the saving grace of the movie. Because other than that, there's not a whole lot going on. It's not very scary. Yeah, the original Amityville Horror to me is the most overrated film. I don't feel that it is a classic, and it's often mentioned as being a horror classic, like a masterpiece of horror, and I just don't agree with that. I don't think it deserves to be hailed as a classic, because it just doesn't hold up today. You know, it's not very scary, and it's just not very good, honestly. But there you have it, folks. That's my top 10 overrated horror films of all time. Now, don't shoot the messenger, folks. But I had fun doing this, and thank you for joining me, guys. Thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.